In this video, we're going to go ahead and implement our CLI. Or at least a fairly large portion of it. Okay, so what I want to go ahead and do is, let's just start off by jumping into our infrastructure CLI namespace, jumping into our command line interface class, and getting this guy implemented. So basically, this is going to be really simple. This class anyway. It's going to start off really simple. And again, it might look really deceptive. It's like, oh, why are you spending all this time running these tests when this class looks so simple? And the reason is, like I said in an earlier video, I intend to extend this class significantly in the future when we start working with executing commands in like admin commands over the chat. And in that case, I absolutely do want to have tests that lock in the functionality of this class, so in the future I don't have to worry about breaking anything. Okay, so how is this going to work? It's going to be very simple. There's going to be one field. It's going to be a dictionary of command names and command objects. So we'll have a private read-only dictionary of a string and command, and we're going to call this commands, not surprisingly. For the constructor is simply going to instantiate that field. Again, I'm not a big fan of field initializers, so I'm not going to get on a rant in field initializers. I just don't really like them. So we'll initialize that field in our constructor. Okay, so what about registering a command? How do we do that? Well, our commands are made up of two parts, and I don't think I really talked about why I wanted the command names to be part of two parts, or words, really. After all, like the different task runners that I've used and all that fun stuff, I found sort of the sweet spot for command line commands is to have sort of a namespace and an action, or a controller and an action. You can think of it like that. And so that's why I want to have like this string group and this string name. But in reality, they both come together to make one unique command name is basically how they're used. The fact that I enforce a group and a name is just so that all commands will have two parts to them, a controller and an action. And fortunately, that fits really nicely with the concept of using a command object. The command object class will be the group, and the individual methods will be the command names. Now, I don't want to support any more or fewer parts than that. And the reason is I don't want to have a command that accepts a string parameter being conflicted with, well, like, okay, let's say, for example, we have a command that is generate thing string parameter, and then we have another command that is something and string parameter, right? So we have this command that has two parts to its name, and then this command that has one part to its name. You'll notice there's an ambiguity. How would it differentiate between this string? Like, what if we wanted to pass in thing into this? Or what if this word would be called generate? That would be a better example, derp. Now we have an ambiguity. And to make it so we don't have to deal with that sort of ambiguity, what I'm doing is I'm enforcing that each command is referenced by a group and a name, or a namespace and a name, or a controller and action, whatever nouns you want to use to think of that. So you can have no more and no fewer parts to a command's name. However, for the purposes of our command line interface class itself, in reality, we can just combine the group name and the command name into one name and then store it into the dictionary. Which, by the way, I've already made a mistake in this video. I just realized that this dictionary up here, that I'm instantiating, I really do want to use a string compare dot invariant culture ignore case as the parameter to its constructor. And what this will do is it'll effectively make this dictionary case insensitive. I want my commands, my command groups, and my command names to be case insensitive. All right, so yeah, sorry about that. Coming back to register command, it's pretty simple. All we're going to do is we're going to say commands.add. Then I'm going to say get full command name, which is a method we haven't written yet, group and name command. So what's this method doing? It is adding a command to a dictionary. Now, I am using the add method of the dictionary on purpose. The reason I'm doing that is if you invoke the add method twice with the same key on a dictionary, you'll get an exception. So I basically already have the error condition worked out for me by just taking advantage of dictionary's default behavior. Remember how I said I don't want to be able to register 2 commands with the exact same name because, well, that would indicate a bug somewhere? Well, using the .add method of the dictionary takes care of that error condition because now it'll throw an exception if that key already exists. Okay, so how are we going to implement getFull command name? So basically the getFull command name is used to combine a group and a name into a single string that's used as a key. Well, the signature of the method is going to look like private string getFull command name string group string name. And it's basically just going to combine group and name. So you might be thinking, okay, well, we could do something like that, but that's not going to really work. And the reason that's not going to work is imagine if we had a command that was command or group name, and then we had another command that was something like that, right? They would be ambiguous in this system because we're just combining the group and the name, and now they're ambiguous because they're just combined like that. So we wouldn't know which one is which, and we would get an exception if we tried to add both those commands. So we need a separator. However, by necessitating a separator, such as the separator I've chosen, which is going to be a pipe symbol, we now can no longer let groups or names contain that separator symbol. And the reason is because of just some basic forward thinking. Now, we could, it wouldn't, words. We could definitely leave it in there. We wouldn't get any conflicts, but in the future, if I ever wanted to re-separate out the group and the name, I wouldn't be able to. And I kind of wanted to just enforce that for a sort of longevity sort of perspective. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to prevent groups or names from containing pipe symbols. So I'm going to say if group contains a pipe symbol, then we're simply going to throw a new argument exception saying group cannot contain pipe symbol group. And then if name contains pipe symbol, throw new argument exception. Name cannot contain pipe symbol. Name. All right, and then the last thing I want to do is I'm going to make this this method static because I can. I prefer for private methods, I prefer them to be static if they can be. Okay, so that is our getFull command name method. Now we have properly keyed in our commands, and in fact, one of our tests should now be passing. So registering the same component twice does now throw an error. Okay, so now let's move on to the execute method. So the execute method is going to be pretty straightforward. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure arguments, I'm going to say if arguments.length is smaller than 2, I'm going to throw a new argument exception, not enough arguments. So why am I doing that? Well, all commands have a group and a name, and they're both separate, so the string array needs to have at least a group and a name for the command. If it's less than 2, we know it's invalid. Then I can say var full command name equals getFull command name, passing in arguments 0 and arguments 1. Since now I know that the arguments array has at least 2 elements in it, I can safely access its first and second element. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to extract a command. So I'm going to say command. Then I'm going to say if not _commands try get value full command name out command. then throw new argument exception, and I'm going to say string.format command blank not found. Command blank being our full command name. And then, of course, our argument exception, I'm going to pass in arguments as the argument that is failing. Finally, the last thing I want to do is say command.execute. And then for the command arguments, I'm simply going to pass in command arguments dot from string array, passing in the string arguments and command.parameters. And that's our execute method. Pretty straightforward. Let's go ahead and hit run on our test, and we should have another passing test. And we do. Executing command that doesn't exist indeed throws. So let's go ahead and implement our actual command.execute method. So, coming into the command class, we can go ahead and what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to write this or do a couple things. First of all, we need to implement this parameters property. So what is the parameters property going to do? Well, it's simply going to return parameter list. And that's it. Next up, I'm going to go ahead and create a constructor, so a protected commands constructor, and in which case here, I'm going to say parameter list equals new list of command parameter. And that's all I need right there. So we have now dealt with our little one piece of data that we have in this class. Let's go ahead and worry about our functionality. So the execute method, I'm simply going to go ahead and we're going to need to do, basically we're going to need to verify our arguments and then invoke internal execute. I'm going to separate these and I'm going to separate verify arguments out into its own method. So I'm going to say verify arguments, and then I'm going to say internal execute arguments. Then at the bottom of the class, I'm going to say private void verify arguments command arguments, and we're basically going to go ahead and make sure that all the arguments match up with the correct type. So what I'm going to say first is if arguments dot count is less than, or if argument dot count does not equal parameter list dot count, then we'll go ahead and throw a new argument exception. Arguments must be the same size as parameters, and we'll pass in arguments, and then we'll go ahead and enter a loop for var I equals 0, I smaller than arguments count. We can safely enter this loop because we know that both collections have the same amount of items in them. So I'm going to say var parameter equals parameter list at I, var argument equals arguments dot get I, and then I'm going to say if not parameter dot parameter type dot is instance of type argument, then throw new argument exception, argument exception, there you go, string format, and we're simply going to say something like argument blank does not match parameter type of blank. So argument at the current index does not match parameter type of parameter.parameter type.name. Or let's do full name. All right, so let's go ahead back into our unit test and hit run. And now we have a argument supposed to be the same size as parameters, and we have 2 errors. All right, sweet. So we have a couple errors. So something is not working, but we can go ahead and fix it. So register and execute 0 parameters. Let's do this one first. It's saying system argument exception. Arguments must be the same size as parameters. And it's happening, in fact, right here. So what's going on here? Let's go ahead and set a breakpoint right there. and then I will hit debug. So I select the test, and I hit the debug button. And we'll check the counts ourselves. We have 2, and parameter list has 0. Parameter list has a count of 0, but arguments has a count of 2. Ooh, you know why? Wow, I'm stupid. I just realized exactly what's wrong with this. Let's go back to the command line interface. The problem is that our command arguments class, our from string array, we're passing in our arguments string array, which unfortunately has 2 items in it which aren't actual arguments. They are the name of the command. So what I'm going to do here is in our from string array, I guess I can go ahead and change the concept here and have it sort of, let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and just start the index off on 2. So all I did here is I changed the index that we start off on, well, to 2. And then on the processed arguments index, I'll subtract 2. And that will chop off the first 2 arguments that were passed into the command. And we're still getting an error, because of course we are. Let's go ahead and hit debug and see what's going on here. Arguments to parameter list is still 0. Oh, wait a sec. Yeah, arguments is 2, which is odd. So let's go ahead and jump into our from string array method, and let's set a breakpoint right here. Now, parameters is 0. Oh, well, that's because up here, our new object of arguments.length, it's actually arguments.length minus 2. I also want to go ahead and add a check all the way at the top of this. I want to say if arguments.length equals 2, meaning there are no arguments, then return new command arguments new object 0. All right, now let's go ahead and run all our tests. All right, now both of these tests are working. However, our command arguments tests are no longer working, and that's because we changed the behavior of our command argument tests. And our 2 parameter doesn't work either. Command param1 20.3 not found. All right, let's jump into our tests real fast and fix that first. Register command. Oh, that's because I never passed in the name of the command into this. So obviously it's not going to work. Okay, let's change our test to passing in group, followed by command, followed by param1, followed by param2. Run all of our tests. All right. So now our command, so now these guys are all failing because the arguments needs to be chopped. There needs to be 2 elements before on the arguments. So all we're going to do here is we're just going to add 2 empty strings on all of our command arguments tests. We're going to add 2 empty strings to our arguments variable so that, remember, this is the command name and that's the command group, or other way around. So let's go ahead and do that there too on our command argument throw if conversion not possible. And let's go ahead and do that here. And let's go ahead and do that. No, we don't need to do that there. Or do we? All right, so now all those pass. And now command arguments parses commands does not work. It got an empty string. Oh, it should be arguments. We need to change that arguments 0 to arguments 2 to offset that index. That's really annoying that I have to do that. But I really, for our command arguments, I really want to avoid instantiating a new array or anything like that. So that's why we have to, on our from string array method, we have to make sure that we offset our arguments array, because the arguments array that I pass in here, I really want it to be an actual array that is not a copy of anything, so that we avoid another object instantiation. So I want this arguments array to come directly from the command line, for example, which is now why we have to offset everything by 2. It's annoying, it's ugly, but it's going to be the best way to do it. Because if alternatively, if I accepted an IEnumerable of arguments, I would run into a problem where I wouldn't be able to count the size of the arguments to pre-allocate the processed arguments array, and it would just be a big mess. Anyway, all of our tests are passing except for the 2 that deal with our command object. So if I scroll up here, we now have these 2 tests, which are now failing. I want to go ahead and change these tests real fast before we go ahead and write them out. We'll do that in the next video, I think. I want to make one more change to that. I want to go ahead and add a test in for our CLI name attribute. But we'll do that in the next video, and I guess we'll see you guys then.